Hi, I'm Mark Smith with Family Tree Counseling Associates, and I'm the author of Managing Abandonment Issues Through Recovery. This week, I've started another book, a book on shame, called Healing Toxic Shame Through Recovery. I had a wonderful beginning of my day today. I went to Treasure Island to a establishment right on the beach and had breakfast with one of my readers who has watched my YouTube videos and has gotten on our mailing list and has actually read the book on abandonment. So we had a therapy session slash breakfast slash cigar smoking session right on the beach today, and it was great getting to know one of my readers and to be able to arrange for some feedback for him, and it was just a unique setup, and I enjoyed it. So the topic of the video today is 12 major causes of shame. And of course, we know that shame has its roots in childhood. Sometimes I'll get people in and they'll say, well, I grew up in a healthy childhood, and it wasn't until I met that stinker, that guy, this husband of mine who's the bad guy, that's when I started to be shamed. No, that is not true. That is never true. That has never been true in the history of marriage, in fact. If you married a stinker, it's because there were some things in your family growing up that lent themselves to you marrying that stinker. So it's not really about the stinker. It's about how you were shamed and how you were wounded in your childhood growing up. So to think otherwise is it's just not true. So good therapy is about truth. So we try to unearth the things that are true. So the first major cause of shame that's rooted in childhood is just parents that are overly critical, an environment of criticism. I grew up in a family of 7 children that was dominated by my mother, who was I call her Doris Day on steroids. She could be joyous and would make fudge and sing, and it was everybody's friend. But then she could rage on a dime. Just boom, something would set her off, and she would become not Doris Day. So it was an environment where the kids learned how to defend themselves psychologically against an onslaught. And as we grew up, various ones of us became better at being right, being critical. So these days, around a family gathering, we play a euchre game called Double Deck Bid. Euchre, it's sort of euchre on steroids. And it's sort of a competitive, vicious game. And at my family, if you're playing and you make a mistake, or even if you don't make a mistake and the cards just don't go your way, my family's been known to be very critical and attacking and shaming. And I got to tell you that even though I'm the therapist and I know all this stuff and I'm writing a book on shame, if you catch me in a Christmas where I'm unprepared, that shame just goes right through me, and one of my brothers can say something demeaning of my card-playing skills, and I could act like a 2-year-old. That's shame. And if you grow up in a critical, harsh, shaming environment, you will carry that around with you the rest of your life. The second, and it's more subtle, form of something that's caused shame in your childhood is just a controlling environment. I've had a lot of people through the years who grew up being subtly controlled, but then in their marriages they pick a rager. And they come in and say, well, Mark, I didn't grow up with a rager. How come I married one? Well, being overly controlled in a rigid environment, it really is a form of quiet, subtle rage. So if you're in an environment where you're not trusted to be age appropriate, a lot of times some of this control is about overprotection. It's about fear. If you grow up in an environment like that, the message is, we don't trust you, and we're going to control you, and you are less than. And when you get the message that you are less than, that is shaming. So some people say, well, I grew up with Beaver Cleaver and his dad Ward and his mom June. Well, no, you didn't. I've never met that person who grew up. If you come in and tell me that, then I know that there are some subtle things, because this is an immutable law of nature. This is really true. I hope you benefit from this video. I know how healthy somebody is by knowing about their marriage, because you're going to pick somebody always. It's an immutable law of nature. You're always going to pick somebody who's about as healthy as you are psychologically. Almost your psychological twin in terms of how healthy or unhealthy you are and they are. And if your spouse grows up with a bunch of psychopaths and hillbillies and drinkers and, lots of incest in the family and rage and, car thieves and horse thieves. I mean, I did a history of my family and found out I called them a bunch of skonnivers and horse thieves. There wasn't anybody from the Mayflower in my family tree as far as I know. But it's an immutable law of nature that if your spouse grows up in this family that you think is so terribly unhealthy, your spouse is unhealthy as the parents they grew up with, and then guess what? If you marry them, I know how unhealthy you are. You're as unhealthy as her family, as your spouse's family, because you married her, she came from them. So I'm not buying the Beaver Cleaver business. If you grew up, I will say that there generally, when I do a family tree, there's one side when I'm doing my family tree that's real colorful. It's just filled with all kinds of dysfunction. What we do is we instinctively try to pick a family system that's more stable. They're just as crazy, they're just as unhealthy, but they're more stable. There's less color, there's less volatility, there's usually less rage. So the next thing that causes rage, of course, is being exposed to rage, the thing that causes shame. What people don't understand is you don't have to be raged at in order for you to be damaged. You just have to be in the neighborhood, in the vicinity of it. So if parents are raging at one another but not raging at you, it does damage. If a parent, many times what happens is a parent is raging at a sibling and you're exposed to that, that's very damaging. So if you're exposed to rage, even if it's a dad who's yelling and screaming and throwing things, or a mom and they're just mad at some object, that's still rage. It's radioactive, and it will cause you to grow up. What you'll do is you'll take that harsh voice into you. That harsh voice that becomes the voice of your conscience, the voice of your shame. You'll take it in, and it comes from an angry, yelling, punishing, harsh parent. Another subtle form of shame-causing factor would be perfectionism. If you go home and you hand the report card to mom and dad and it's all A's but one A minus, and they don't glow with joy over your tremendous report card, but they ask you about that minus, that is shaming. That is very shaming. So another factor when it comes to developing shame is a family system that has addictions. And I would say every family in America has some addictions. It may not be alcoholism or drugs, but there are so many things that people can be addicted to: work, helping people, exercise, food, religion. There are good things that you can be addicted to, that if they numb you out and they take you away from yourself, then a child in that situation is going to get the message, I am not the number one priority around here. This family is built, my dad's big addiction growing up, oddly enough, was playing bridge. And there's nothing wrong with playing bridge, but when I hear the phrase playing bridge, I hear alcoholism. Because my dad did that in such an addictive, out of control way. His life centered around it. And I knew my dad didn't love me anywhere as much as he loved the game of bridge. And that was shame producing for me, because it made me not feel special. So another causation of shame is just not getting enough nurturing. We learned to love and to be loved growing up in our families. And many times I'll do these family trees and I'll get Germans on both sides, and there's nothing wrong with German people, but they tend not to be lovers. They tend not to be affectionate. They tend to be workers, and many people brought up in German families, they're workers. They're not lovers. So they just didn't get enough tender, loving care. They didn't get enough touch, and then again, it makes them not feel special. So another cause of shame in families growing up is family secrets. John Bradshaw, who has the classic legendary book on shame, Healing the Shame That Binds You, said, you're as sick as your secrets. So if you grow up in a family where there's this overarching family secret, in my family growing up, my mother wasn't the biological child of my grandfather, but I didn't learn this till I was about 13 or so. And my mother didn't learn it until she was like 17, 18, or 19 or so, right in there. So that family secret, when you eventually find it out, again, it produces lack of safety. If you know, what other secrets are there out there? And it produces ultimately shame in the family. Here's one that doesn't get talked about enough, but another form of shame in families growing up is simply not being praised enough. Many times, if you have these sort of stoic German type families, they just don't know how to praise. They didn't receive praise growing up. So if you grew up in that environment and you just weren't praised for all the wonderful things that you were accomplishing, I guarantee you're going to grow up and you're going to pick somebody whose very nature it is not going to be able to praise you and give you the encouragement that you get. Maybe during dating early on when you're enmeshed and it's all wonderful and gooey and fabulous, but once that stage wears off, then you'll find out that the spouse you picked is just like your parents. They are incapable of offering you the praise that you desperately need. And many times in midlife, that's when people are susceptible and vulnerable to affairs, because somebody comes along and just gives them a compliment or two. in the scripture, in Proverbs, where the writer is warning the young man against the wayward woman, he didn't say, hey, watch out for the hot chick. You know, what he said was, watch out for flattering lips. And in our culture, that's basically flirting. And when somebody's flirting with you, they're giving you the message that you're good enough. And if you don't get that message enough, if you don't get enough praise from your spouse, then it can put you at risk to be snagged with the flattery of a stranger. The ninth thing that causes shame in childhood is judgment. If you grow up with a lot of prejudices and judgment, it can leave a stain of shame in your heart. Toxic religion, negative, harsh, rigid religion causes shame. Obviously, sexual abuse is an attack against the spirit, and it leaves massive amounts of shame. And then finally, the 12th condition that tends to cause shame is one that I've never heard anybody talk about, but it's poverty. I grew up very poor, and there are two things that stick out for me in terms of poverty and how it lent to shame, and one is the free lunch program. There wasn't a lot of confidentiality or sensitivity. You went through the line and you had to actually say, I'm a free lunch kid. And every time I did that, I was mortified. I was just mortified. It was very shaming. And then another thing is we lived in homes many times that had cockroaches. And cockroaches, to me, to this day, they sort of embody the whole concept of shame. So these are the things that if you grow up with, they very much will build a sense of low self-esteem and lack of entitlement, and they will also make you very sensitive, overly sensitive to criticism. So I'm trying to share about the concept of shame and where it comes from and what are the symptoms, because it is the common cold of issues in our culture. And not just the sniffles. It's a common, really, really destructive, harmful thing. So you can order some further information about not just shame, but abandonment and other issues, marital therapy, affair recovery, from ebooks on our website. Our website is familytreecounseling.com, and there's a link for 5 of my ebooks, and you can also join our list. And if you join our list, then you'll get constant once a week, sometimes twice a week, emails with lots of blogs and podcasts and videos about various issues related to marriage counseling. And there are other YouTube videos on shame from myself and from people at Family Tree. Well, the goal is to reduce shame, and I hope we've accomplished that, and I thank you very much for listening.